Emergency service workers. When have you laughed when you really shouldn't have? I used to work in an adult and pediatric emergency department as a scribe. I followed a doctor, NP, or a PA and wrote their charts. One time a patient came in for downstairs injury to her girl bits. So the PA I was assigned to, who's my father's age, says, that'll be interesting, and we go in. The lady is very friendly, bubbly, overweight, with long, fake nails. He asks her what brings her to the ED, and she says, "Well, you see, I just got my nails done, and I was having fun and really going to town down there, and it felt really good, and I scratched my hoo-ha." She laughed awkwardly, and I couldn't handle myself and had to leave. The PA kept himself together and told the patient I left because my job was over, as I wrote down her complaint. But honestly, I was crying in the hallway with another tech who overheard. The door was shut, but she was loud and proud and the unit was quiet. I scratched my hoo-ha became a response to "What's up?" at my hospital for a bit. During my EMT basic clinical rotations, my buddy Greg and I are working in an emergency room trying to do as many ECGs as possible, so that we could check that off our list of clinical skills that we needed to do. Greg is hooking up an absolutely enormous woman to ECG leads. To accomplish this, he indicates to her that he'll have to move her left melon to gain access to her chest wall. I'm not exaggerating when I say that she weighed 400 pounds. One of her heaping bosoms probably weighed a solid 40 pounds by itself. So Greg, using the back of his forearm, is pushing aside her left chest. Or trying to, and failing. So he's basically rubbing her left chesticle with his forearm, trying to get it out of the way. His face, meanwhile, is about 12 inches from her face. She leans closer to Greg, moans, and says, "Oh, you like that, don't you?" And I have to leave. I admitted a patient to a surgical floor who had a baton stuck up his butt. When getting to the report, I couldn't help but chuckle. It was the first time I'd dealt with someone who had a foreign object where it shouldn't have been. The worst part was when I showed him the intraoperative pictures of them removing it, he asked the surgeon where the glitter went. "Oh, don't worry. He'll keep finding glitter for years. It never goes away." Once again, doing videos on medical cases, the narrator prepares for the deluge of completely innocent men who seem to fall exactly onto cylindrical objects butt first after their pants fell off. The only thing different about this story is the absence of the words, "I tripped and fell." In fact, this gentleman seems to own it. I work as an X-ray tech in a heavily Hispanic area in the US. I don't know a lot of Spanish, but I know just enough to get by. We get this patient in the ER, and there are 3 of us trying to fumble our way through this exam in our broken Spanish. We eventually get through the exam, and we're all kind of congratulating each other on knowing just enough Spanish. Then, out of the middle of nowhere, this guy says, "You know, you guys speak pretty good Spanish." In perfect English. I guess none of us decided to ask if he spoke English. Similar story, I walked in to perform an exam and the patient is just observing me. I said, "Hi sir, I'm blah blah blah, I'm here to do blah blah blah. How's your day going?" No response. "Can you hear me?" Now I'm thinking that he's not a native or a psych patient. Habla inglés? The patient says, "Do I look like a fricking wetback?" I was holding inside my laughter as I said, no? He was a regular, no tattoos Hispanic male with a mustache with a tanned complexion. He looked like Pedro from Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, he did look like an immigrant that crossed a river. Was an EMT. My partner was doing a head-to-toe on a little old lady that fell at a nursing home. She gets to the patient's left hip, squeezes it and says, "Ma'am, do you know how long you've had this growth on your hip?" Little old lady replies in a TV-worthy Boston Brahmin accent, "That's my chest, dear." Gave myself a bloody nose when I tried to hide my laughter by shoving my face into the oxygen bag and smacking it on the tank. Super busy day on the oncology floor, short-staffed, and I had 6 patients and was in charge. Literally running up and down the halls, no lunch. A patient passed away peacefully. I call next of kin to notify. I stay on the phone to offer condolences and they were speechless. The conversation is weird, so I call the next number on the list, and that call was okay. Turns out I dialed a wrong number, but the wrong number also had a family member in the same hospital. 30 minutes later, the wrong number lady rushes into the unit and asks about the death in room 417. Wasn't a dead patient, by the way. I immediately get drenched in sweat and tell her my error. I got woozy and dizzy. She props me up and started making jokes. We ended up hugging and laughing. She brought me lunch and a card the next week, and I smile every time I think of her. She made my screw-up livable. I had a patient who was high on some intense cocktail of substances. We found him jumping from couch to couch in a lobby covered in freshly cut hair that wasn't his. We finally get him to the ambulance, but he proceeded to scream at my partner, "You have beautiful eyes. I'm gonna F you in the butt." And then he begins to cry for his mother. We make it to the hospital and the patient's vocabulary decreases to only meatballs. Every question the nurse asks, that was his response. We try to remain professional as possible, but sometimes you can't help but laugh. Damn it, he stole my pickup line. Responded to a fatal fire. When I arrived on scene and went to where the body was located, the trooper introduced me to the deceased. The trooper said, where are my manners? Meet Frank, deceased. Say hello, Frank. As you can see, he had a late night of drinking and a bad case of setting himself on fire. Laughing in front of a dead guy who set himself on fire is not one of my strong moments. Ex-firefighter here responded to a rollover with persons trapped inside. It turned out to be a car versus train. Got the front wheels stuck on the tracks. I have no clue how. It was a regular road crossing, so the train is barreling down, blaring horn clips, and flips the car into the ditch. The driver was trapped. My partner, instead of the usual, "Hi ma'am, where are you hurt?" etc., said to the driver, "Did you crap your pants?" One of my friends was an EMT, and he responded to a call from a guy who got attacked by his cat. Turns out the guy tried to do the deed with his cat, and the cat wasn't having any of it. My friend said that was the only time he and his partner laughed in a client's face. So I was riding along with my dad, who was a firefighter and paramedic, and we went to the house for a mentally handicapped female who had fallen and couldn't get up. I should mention that this female lives with her husband, who is also mentally handicapped, and they have a caretaker who checks in on them daily but doesn't hang around 24/7. Anyway, so he sat her up and my dad asks his other medic to run out to the ambulance to grab an extra cold compress to put on her head, where she fell. But she says there's an ice pack in her freezer that will work just fine in the next room. Well, the other medic goes into the other room and looks for about 2 minutes before coming back with a bag of frozen vegetables that would work as well. The mentally handicapped lady looks him straight in the face and says, "That's not a cold pack, those are vegetables. Are you retarded?" In short, paramedic got called retarded by a mentally handicapped woman. I feel like that's one of the few people who could get away with using that insult. Also, how do you respond when she calls you that? Pretty damn funny. This happened to me once, at a grocery store when the new tap-to-pay cards came out. I'd never used it, so I quickly tapped it, and it didn't register as you had to hold it there for a few seconds. The mentally challenged bag boy said, "Is this guy retarded?" to the cashier. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry. I was administering IV push meds to a patient. Their guest was German and asks me with a giant smile, "Are those the Woodstock substances that make him super happy hippo, yeah?" I fricking lost it. Patient who was in police custody and out of his mind on some substance or other. A nurse entered to use a catheter to get a urine sample for the analysis, and in the process of doing that, the patient screams, "It feels like a fly is doing the deed with my wang." Also, an older guy who may or may not have been there mentally gave me a lecture on how he knew I was a liar because my lips were moving. I had to step out of the room to laugh. Sort of reverse here. During my rotations at a university medical center, I was shadowing an RN when we went to help a patient who was paralyzed from the waist down from a motorcycle accident. Keep in mind, this patient was big, probably 300 pounds, and he couldn't go number 2 by himself anymore. Therefore, the RN put on rock music, snapped on some gloves, and proceeded to joke with the patient. We had to push down on his stomach while digitally activating his butt to make the brown stuff come out. I swear about a gallon of it burst forth, and the nurse told me it was the biggest code brown he had ever seen. Making jokes and laughing with the patient made it extremely comfortable and a fun experience. 10 out of 10 would stick my finger up a butt again. I had a 95-year-old nurse crap on my hand once. We both laughed. I answered a fire alarm at a hotel room once. I knocked on the door and a rail-thin, 90-pound-ish woman answered the door in nothing but a t-shirt. I told her that we need to have access to the hotel room just to verify that there wasn't an issue. I walk in and immediately see a 300-pound, mid-50s guy, the woman was in her 30s, totally undressed and handcuffed to the bed. Alright, whatever. Standard question, do you know how the alarm was set off? Oh, yeah, I accidentally hit it when I threw his boxer shorts. Alright, ma'am, have a nice night. Cue hilarious laughter from the stairwell back to the firehouse. How do boxers set off a fire alarm? If you throw something at an electric firearm, like a smokehead or something, it can set it off. Same thing happens with CO alarms. If you dropped it or knocked into it, or apparently throw boxes at it, it can set it off. This wasn't a sprinkler head, or I'd have felt far worse for the guy handcuffed to the bed because he would have taken it all. I was an intern firefighter back when I was in college, and we received this distress call from a senior home one day. Apparently there was an old lady about 70 to 75 years old who was really drunk, and she broke her hip walking through the hallway. When we got there, she was on the ground covered in her own number 2. The thing I laughed at was what she was saying while she was on the ground. The old lady said, "Get the frick off me!" The captain said, "Ma'am, you need to hold still while the ambulance comes." Hey, Oscar," referring to her housekeeper. "Is that you?" "Yes, ma'am, Oscar is right here." "Well, F you, Oscar." Advanced emergency medical technician working a standby at one of our many nightclubs a couple of summers ago. I came back from handing over a transport to find a man with a hole in the front of his jeans all covered in blood. He was sitting calmly next to his friend, joking and having a good time. I ask him what's going on, and he admits to drinking and taking quite a bit of white snow. He states that he's not in any pain but worried about all the blood. We expose his nether regions to find out that he had apparently impaled his ball bag on the cleat of a pool umbrella and now had one of his family jewels protruding from said hole. His very British friend saw what happened and yelled, "Bollocks, me mate, your bean is out the bag." I had to excuse myself for a minute. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a gentleman unalive himself by placing a clear plastic bag over his head and running a line from a helium tank. Apparently, it's one of the least painful ways to go. You just get sleepy and pass out. No oxygen starvation. Anyways, me and my partner are waiting for the deputy since it's clear he's been dead a while. We start talking in the bathroom with the body. So, what do you think his last words were? "Ahoy! Goodbye, world!" Said in a Mickey Mouse voice, of course. I'll never forget that I had hiccups for 2 hours after we got done laughing our butts off. The report and dealing with the family was super awkward. Had a pregnant lady about to pop and brought her upstairs. The L&D nurses at this facility were pretty snobby and always seemed to have an attitude problem. I gave them my report and told them that according to my assessment, they needed to prep for delivery ASAP. The charge nurse rolled her eyes at me and began condescendingly interviewing the patient, telling her she's sure that the patient will be able to go home tonight. About 5 minutes go by and they finally get her over to the bed from my stretcher. I get my paperwork signed. The nurse goes to check for dilation and lifts up the sheet only to find that the patient is crowning. She immediately starts yelling for help and gives me a dirty look. I whispered, "Told you so," winked and walked out as the rest of the nurses walked in to help. Not my most professional moment, but I had a good chuckle. "She gave you a dirty look for doing your job properly? Jeez." Some people would rather be right than do the right thing, and this lady clearly took someone else's correct opinion personally. Very satisfying to be in the position of the correct individual. My dad's a police officer and has always been known for his dark dad humor. One unfortunate day, a motorcyclist ran a red light at an intersection just before a truck stop and was run over. The rider's head and helmet were caught under the wheels of the truck and popped. As he tells the story, a lieutenant shows up and asks, "What happened here, and what are we stepping in that's so sticky?" My dad said, "Well, the rider lost his mind." I thought it was funny, as did my dad. Apparently, the lieutenant did not. When I was an EMT and I had a psych patient that had been picked up at the airport by the cops after he was found wandering around barefoot, my report from them was quite vague, so I didn't really know what to expect when I was asking him questions. He didn't seem very oriented and kept drifting off to sleep. I asked him if he knew what year it was, and he said 1985, and he suddenly yelled, 1.21 gigawatts! I was so startled I couldn't help but laugh. I still don't know whether he was messing with me or not, but either way, he must really like Back to the Future. I was an EMT. We responded to a call at a nursing home for a psychological. Got the info from the nurse that the dear little old lady is apparently hallucinating cats. I walked into the patient's room and asked, "Meow, what seems to be the problem here?" My partner and the nurse ran from the room. I found them literally on the floor laughing in the hallway. So I don't know if I fit the category, but this story made me lose all professionalism in a heartbeat. I'm a social worker, so I interview a lot of children. One of the standard questions is asking if children know where their private parts are and asking if anyone has ever touched them there. So I ask this 11-year-old if anyone has tried to touch her, and she says no. I ask if she knows what to do if someone tries to do that. She tells me that whenever she goes to a friend's house, she has a pair of scissors under her pillow for protection. I chuckled a bit, but maintained my composure. I asked the girl if she would tell anyone. She says she'd tell her mum and tell that she didn't kill them on purpose. I lost it. I couldn't continue the interview after that. I told my supervisor about it and she just laughed. A young lady admitted into the ER, embarrassed to death with a small piece of plastic from a toy stuck in her lady parts. While getting an IV from the nurse, she complained about getting jabbed with a metal needle. The nurse started to explain how the IV catheter is actually plastic, to which she responded, "I've got enough plastic stuck in me right now, thank you very much." Back in my army days, we were in the process of doing an 18-mile ruck march. It's pretty hot out. All of a sudden, one of my squad members collapses to the ground. The medics rush to him and start sticking an IV in his arm while asking him questions. Do you know where you are? Do you know what month it is? Do you know what day of the week it is? He looks up, confused. Waffles. No, you fricking moron. Let's get him out of here. It's been brought to my attention that something similar has happened in a documentary where the guy mentioned hash browns. Heat exhaustion is some pretty crazy stuff. It happened to me once. I was very confused and all I could think about were mashed potatoes. I followed everyone, not quite knowing what was going on, and ended up in the chow hall. Standing in the line, someone must have noticed something was wrong. He asked if I was okay, and I responded, "I don't know, I just need mashed potatoes." They were talking to me some more. I don't know what they were asking, and all I could do was answer, "Yes." They led me to the front of the line. Turns out they were serving mashed potatoes. Best damn potatoes I've ever had. After resting, eating, and drinking, I was fine though. I was a newish certified nursing assistant, and a patient caught the bus, self-deleted, during my shift. The aide who had the woman on her assignment grabbed me and another newbie to show us how to do postmortem care. We undress the body and begin to wash it. I'm standing on one side, other newbie on the other, experienced aide at the foot of the bed. We roll the body onto its side towards me and it moans. The newbie got bug-eyed and started to freak out. The experienced aide explains that it's just air leaving the lungs and passing through the vocal cords. The newbie accepts this but is clearly freaked out. It's her first dead person. We roll the body the other way and it moans again. Newbie begins to freak out again. By now I'm no longer on task and just amused as heck by the newbie. Then the newbie glances at our deceased friend's face. In the course of rolling the body back and forth, her eyelids had been pushed open. Newbie starts to panic. She's looking at me. Oh God, she's looking at me. Why is she looking at me? Newbie then runs out of the room and I just lose it. Can't hold it together anymore and I start to laugh. After the moment passed, I felt a little bad laughing while preparing a body for the funeral home, but I know that our patient would have found the situation hysterical too. Ex-corrections officer. I was caught on camera laughing wildly while having to subdue an undressed man covered in number 2 wielding a butt shank. He'd used the brown stuff to paint on Peter Criss makeup. That stuff cracked me up. Well, I'm guessing that particular Kiss tribute band didn't take off then. Sad. I feel it would have been novel, if not good. Firefighter here. I was doing a primary search on the first floor when my captain and I crawled straight into a special dungeon. The call started out pretty normal as far as emergency dispatches are concerned. A neighbor sees smoke coming out from a house nearby, the proper address is given, and we roll out. On scene now, and the neighbors have gathered and informed us that the homeowner is usually gone this time of day. But usually doesn't cut it in the fire service, so we're going in. So my captain and I grab a handline and went to complete a primary search of the first floor as the rest of the arriving responders set up a second floor egress route and pull more handlines. So as soon as we get in the front door, amen Halligan, we stick along the right side wall and move further into the house. Thermal imaging shows no heat, but there was a ton of smoke coming from the door that leads to the basement. We head down the stairs after a careful sounding, and this is when stuff got weird. Imagine a room full of hot smoke. That smoke will rise, and since this smoke was coming from the basement, the lower we got into the basement, the more smoke cleared. Walls, ceiling, floor all lined with rubber, and a close rack full of rubber suits. A table with straps, all also covered in rubber. Whips, cuffs, some special toys, and things that shouldn't belong in any chamber related to doing the deed. And the most effed up part we found down there was the homeowner, in a full dungeon uniform, trying to put out a fire that was running from the top of the light stand he had set up to the ceiling. It wasn't too big to be honest, but way too big to be fanning with a folded rubber suit while wearing another rubber suit in a room covered in rubber. This guy must not have realized all the gross, toxic, thick smoke heading up the stairs and out of the house. Honestly, I don't know how long he was down there, but without my SCBA on, it felt like I was snorting Rubbermaid. We grabbed the homeowner, who was now suffering from severe overheating and exhaustion because he was in a full-body rubber suit panicking, and then we got the fire out. So when did I laugh when I shouldn't have? Well, right as we came into full view of this chamber, I looked back at my God-loving Christian captain, who was just in shock as his worldview was altered. So I started cracking up there, and once you start laughing when you're not supposed to, it's impossible to stop. So I'm losing it, as well as my oxygen supply. I've seriously never gone through a tank that quick in my career. So the fire was out, and people were gathered, as at any fire, barn or house, and were watching two firefighters, one of whom was laughing his butt off, carry this black, steamy, rubber-covered creature out of his house. Then we have to start getting this guy's outfit off because he's showing signs of extreme exhaustion. I calmed down enough to cut this guy out of his suit in front of all his neighbors, who are now realizing this steamy black creature is their neighbor. That's when we figured we should disperse everyone to give the guy a little privacy. We even pulled the trucks up to block most of the scene. All in all, the guy thanked us but said he was quite embarrassed about the whole thing, which was quite obvious. He was a pretty normal guy as far as I'm concerned. He explained a little about how he likes the feeling of rubber completely airtight around his skin, which was unneeded information, but I'm not the one to tell anyone how to live their life. You do you, rubber suit man. We had an OD we responded to that turned into a running joke at the station. Some girl tried to self-delete and took like 2 milligrams of fentanyl. Normal doses are in micrograms, not milligrams. Anyway, got her close enough to the ER and pumped her full of Narcan and she woke up. Partner opened the back doors and said, "All better, huh?" And she was angry about it and whined about how we didn't know what we were doing. I was being a bit of a jerk and said, "Well, the Narcan was a great guess then." To which she screamed, "Narcan don't do crap." And now whenever we use Narcan, it's good form to shout, "Narcan don't do crap," while pushing it. Little old racist white ladies are always good for a giggle as well. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.